Welcome to the Multifaceted Executive, the podcast where leadership meets diversity, innovation, and impact. We go beyond boardrooms and titles to bring you powerful stories and insights from executives of all backgrounds. Get ready to challenge conventional thinking, gain fresh perspectives, and discover the leadership lessons you won't hear anywhere else. I'm your host, Amanda Cosme-Reddie, founder and CEO of the Multifaceted Executive and Take Brand Consulting. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Multifaceted Executive Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Cosme-Reddie, founder and CEO of the Multifaceted Executive and Take Brand Consulting. For those that are new here, a multifaceted executive is a leader with many facets. They're not defined by a single industry, background, or leadership style, but rather their ability to adapt, inspire, and create impact across different spaces. Joining me today is David Scott. He's a market president and banking executive who embraces his personal and professional brand and has learned that risk is the price of authenticity, which is what we're going to focus on today when we learn more about David's story. David, thank you for joining me, and I invite you to further introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Amanda. This is really fun, and appreciate you having me on the show here to talk a little bit more about my background experience and everything like that, because there's a lot to dig into. And you said I'm a banking executive, but I grew up on a small farm in Louisiana in a little out of the way rural community in what's called the Louisiana Delta. So it was not like Maricopa County in any way, shape, or form. And, it was a lot wetter there and no mountains or anything either. And I grew up in this country life. I moved out of Louisiana and went to Texas and Arizona and California and all over the place in my career. And, just always been the same little farm kid at heart. And I've been blessed to be taken in a lot of different places in my career. And now I get to build something and grow this new market for a bank and build my team and establish this culture. It's so much fun. And I do it largely based off of a lot of the values that I grew up with and the things that I learned along the way incorporated into that. I live in Mesa, and my family is here. My wife and two kids who are 12 and 10. We just have this wonderful just vibe in my family. So I'm really blessed with all of that.
That's great. And I'm sure being raised by your own parents, you've probably brought some of those values and traits into your own family now. Talk a little bit more about the values that you learned growing up and how that's extended into your leadership today.
I've been reflecting a lot about how I grew up, because I think you need to always remember where you came from. And most people come from, a strong cultural background of one way or another, and you go layer by layer and you find out that a lot of those values are really similar, and we express ourselves in different ways. My family, they settled in that area in the mid 1800s when it was the wild frontier, and they literally carved theirself out a place, cut the trees down, farmed that area, and lived off the land. In the wintertime, they hunted and fished and stockpiled meat and things like that for the rest of the year. And they were frontier people, and those values are what got instilled in me, not directly by them explaining every little thing that they did, but through observation and kind of a hands-on learning experience that I had. It's all about doing the right thing, even though it might be the hard thing to do, especially as a man and as as a father, a son, anything like that. It's always about doing what's right. Sometimes that might be uncomfortable and might be hard, but that's what needs to be done. And you look after your family and you look after your community, and that's what I saw my dad, my grandfather. I'm sure they learned it from the men before them, and from the ladies that were in their lives as well. It's the way it is on the frontier. My grandfather, who was born in 1904, he did not have electricity and running water till he was middle-aged. And my dad was the first person in my family that was born in an actual like medical facility. And, I think a lot of people, they go a couple generations back, it's similar story. As you go through your busyness of your day-to-day life, a lot of the things and the ways that you're making decisions are based off of those things.
Yeah, my kids are right around the age of your kids. And I try not to spoil my kids. I try not to give them everything. And yet, technology these days, and like you said, we live in a more modern time. I'm always trying to make sure my kids find a lesson and that they're understanding and developing their own values along the way. Do you feel like that's the same for you, growing up, boots on the ground, really hardworking family to society where everything is handed to us? Do you have those conversations with your kids?
I used to worry about that and go, well, my kids are going to grow up in a completely different way from me. Are they really going to have those values? They've never had to drive a tractor. My grandfather grew up where the mode of transportation was a horse, and that's not what I experienced as a child, and I still think I turned out okay. The technology and the surroundings that we have, they're always constantly changing and evolving, but the undercurrent of the values that you have, they really don't. What I've seen reflected back in my children and the decisions that they make and their judgment and how they treat other people, all of that still has translated through the course of time just fine, because that's core of who we are. And I've learned to lighten up about a lot of that and say that, my kids don't have to have necessarily the same kind of experiences that I did when I was growing up. And in some ways, I hope that they don't. That shaped me the way that I am today, I would have preferred not to have experienced. But they can still be the kind of people that I hope they would grow up to be without any of that, because they learn through the example that you set. My dad always brought me along to stuff. I was always tagging along. And it wasn't ever like he explained to me, this is why I made this decision. And the same with my grandparents. I was observing how they were treating people and other things like kindness and compassion. I feel like maybe that's what's being passed along from generation to generation, more so than just specific skills.
Yeah, I love this idea of embracing the evolution of different generations and adapting. And I'm sure that's what's helped you become such an amazing leader today. And I know that you are focused on making sure the brand you put out there is encompassing your personal life, your family, your friends, the things you enjoy doing, while also, being the professional you are within the baking industry. You've had this unique upbringing. You've learned a lot of values along the way. What values do you feel align with your decision making, especially in high pressure roles within banking?
The values that jump out at me are definitely patience and generosity. The growth in the business that we've created has been because we've been willing to give time, energy, maybe in unexpected ways. For example, a lot of our smaller business customers who don't expect that anyone would pay much attention to them because they don't have a lot of money. They know what that feels like when someone is treated that way, where you have more of an advantage because you have the financial strength where people fight over your business and everyone else is ignored. Your reputation and your brand and how people perceive you starts to build up because they recognize the generosity and kindness and everything like that you have, and that starts to precede you wherever you go. And you have to be able to accept the risk of that. Not everybody's going to be as patient with it as you are. As a leader, what I need my people on my team to understand is that I am very patient when it comes to developing business that way, because I know that the rewards of that are much greater on down the road. And if leadership doesn't recognize that, if they're not willing to be patient with it, then it creates an uncomfortable situation for everyone that's involved in it. So if you're going to do it that way, you have to be comfortable with taking the criticism potentially for that, understanding that if you really stick it out, then you're going to see amazing results, which we definitely have. I'm a testament to that. It works. But there's times in the middle where there's a lot of uncertainty. And that's, I think, one of the really clear marks of leadership is that you don't panic, you don't overreact, you continue to have the discipline, and you may make adjustments, but you don't throw away your team and get a new one. That's not how you're going to build success. You're going to have to figure out a path forward all the time through very uncertain territory where you stick to your values and you don't compromise the things that matter the most.
Yeah, I absolutely love that because we obviously have our own values, right? You've mentioned a few: patience, generosity, and maybe other people don't have those same values. There may be people that are the complete opposite. They want things done quickly. They're not patient. They may be direct, and that may come off as unsettling. When you mix all these different people in a workplace together, it is important to understand how your values align with others and how they potentially cause friction when you're not on the same page. You made a really great point around leadership and making sure that you are disciplined. It's kind of ties back to emotional intelligence, right? Understanding how you should be reacting to a situation, when you should be reflecting on your own emotions so that way you don't let them get in the way of strategic decisions. Personally, emotional intelligence is a key skill and a value I take with me everywhere. Our values are, yes, a symbol of how we are and how we treat others, but they're also used when we interact with others that don't share those similar values to us. I'm sure you've run across this a lot working in the banking industry. Do you feel like where you're at now and where you've been in the past, there's a difference in the people that you're working with based on their values?
There is, to a degree. People are still people, and their environment will sometimes drive what the surface level norms, values that they feel like their company culture promotes. But the people are still fairly consistent, I would say, in terms of what's going on underneath. And I've been really focused recently on trying to understand what happens to organizations when they scale to large sizes, and the erosion of some of those values that we mentioned earlier about patience and generosity, when there's a bureaucracy that forms in the middle that starts to act more like a machine than an emotionally intelligent consciousness that you might find with smaller organizations where everyone knows each other and has the ability to develop relationships with one another. And I've been paying attention to that because I do think that culture tends to break down and become much more inconsistent when companies or organizations get very large. And I think it just starts to take a little bit of the humanity out of it, but the people are still the same. And they still value and crave trust and understanding, and compassion and all of that sort of thing is still there. It just becomes a little bit more difficult to implement that when you have a lot of people that could potentially disrupt that culturally.
It reminds me of something you've mentioned actually in previous conversations we've had, this idea of performative professionalism and how it's really outdated and it can be exhausting. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think one thing that I know people in my industry understand, which was one of the reasons why working from home and COVID and that sort of thing was such a relief, because previous to that was what I used to refer to as the 5 o'clock game of chicken, where people would they'd be done with what they were planning on doing 4:15 or so, and then they have to pretend to work hard or be busy until 5 o'clock because they don't want to leave and be perceived as being, lazy or something like that. But pretty much the entire office was that way. And then when 5 o'clock rolls around, which is like an acceptable time to go home to your family or whatever, it was a waiting game to see who was going to break first, who was going to go. And invariably, as soon as somebody decided, oh, I'm packing it up, I'm going home, like 5 to 10 people would go immediately out the door afterwards because it was now safe. You weren't going to be the first one out. And it was all a big performance. It was BS. Because instead of being treated like adults where we can manage the workload that we have and be able to go home and see our family and that sort of thing, we felt this unspoken obligation to be there to a specific period of time. I had to wear a suit every day, even though over time my customers stopped dressing formally and they started getting a little weird about, like, why are you wearing a suit and tie? Well, because you want your banker to look like a professional, right? And a lot of times they're like, yeah, don't care, actually. I care more about, how you're able to help me with whatever the issue is that I have. I don't really care what color suit you got on. You start to like really examine it and you realize that in a lot of areas of your life, what you're actually doing is you're trying to please some imaginary person who you think that those superficial things matter to them when it isn't true. Then the expectations start to pile up on yourself and the stress and all of this sort of thing where, it's all imagined. If we could just speak more openly about it, then we would start to be able to move past some of these things that we can all agree don't really matter all that much. Another example is tattoos. In my line of work, you can't do that. Historically, because, I guess people with tattoos aren't trustworthy or, are bad people. Is that true, Amanda? Because you and I have tattoos and like when I got out of the chair, I didn't feel like, oh man, I'm evil now. So I had to hide those for a long time because I felt like people would judge me negatively for it. Now I find that more people feel more comfortable around me because they don't feel like they have to rise up to this level of this executive banker kind of guy who's got much more superior intellect than everyone else and makes a whole lot more money than everybody else. And so now they have to compensate for that. And so instead of having a real and genuine conversation about what those deeper reasons why, some things are concerning to them and they need help with, then it stays at that very surface level. And when we talk about emotional intelligence, you actually have to live that out in understanding how you need to show up to create an emotionally safe place for other people to interact with you. And if I sat down and hiding the real person that I am, we're never going to connect. We just won't. For that trust to exist, there needs to be a genuine connection that's made. I do a lot of this deliberately to take that risk for other people, to show them that I'm okay with it. And I'm okay if some random person, is critical of me for that.
Yeah, you're living your true authentic self. And that is a huge part of building a brand. In fact, when you can fully step out authentically, that is when you have a strategic brand. There's other things that lead up to that, but I agree. And I want to go back to a couple of the points that you made. For example, my husband, he works for Wells Fargo, and there used to be a time where they had to show up in a suit. It was every day in a suit. Then later on, they started to say, okay, on Fridays, you could wear a t-shirt and then it's, you could wear this cardigan. And so it's been a little bit more flexible for him in terms of dress codes, but it's interesting to see those banks adapting. And then even when it comes to the tattoos, my situation with tattoos is a little bit different from yours, but still I felt like I needed to hide them in workplaces. And my reason was because people would label me as ghetto. I'm a Latina. I'm from Chicago. Here I am, especially where I lived, which was like in Scottsdale, Cave Creek. It wasn't like a big thing around that area. And so I stood out when I had tattoos. People will always label you for what they see you as. But, going back to the title of our episode, the risk is the cost of authenticity. You have to risk putting yourself out there from an appearance perspective, from how you speak, and you have to be okay with being your authentic self. If you can't, then you don't have a strategic brand that you can live by. There's even situations in the banking industry. There's obviously bankers that deal with very high profile clients, right? These are wealthy people. And I've seen cases where bankers will want to wear that expensive watch or wear something that is able to build a connection with another person. And again, you're not being authentic. That's when people tend to lose their own self in the process.
Right. Yeah. Think about it from the other side of it. Where how would you feel if someone dressed in a certain way that they normally wouldn't to meet with you to impress you in some way that wasn't genuine. Like you would instantly kind of start to question credibility, and it would be more difficult to establish trust that way because they're pandering to you. They're trying to create a false persona, just particularly to manipulate you into doing business with them. And I think on a basic level, most people can sense that. The further you are away from your true self, the more far from home you seem. I wouldn't say that I've been perfect with that at all, because I've certainly, time in my career tried to impress people, but I had some motivational speaker gave a little nugget that was easy to remember, which was be interested, not interesting. When you're trying to be interesting, then you start saying things about yourself to embellish or try to make you seem like something that you think that other person wants to hear. And, I just can't tell you how easy it is, because I've spent my entire career as someone who had to evaluate information and character and make a judgment call about whether someone is going to pay me back for lending them money, which is not a financial analysis in total. It's much more of a character analysis too, that I can sense that dishonesty immediately. And I don't show it. I don't reveal that to people usually, but you can't BS me. You just can't. If you tell me the things that you think I want to hear, I know. And everyone on some level knows. So why? Why are you putting yourself through all of this just to have a transaction? You're never going to have the relationship, because that's not the approach that you took. And this is a tough lesson for people to learn, because it puts you at this perception of that you're at risk, that people are going to see you for who you really are, and they're going to judge you.
Yeah. Well, and I think we do a lot more assuming than we do by using curiosity. To your point earlier, you said someone could do something to try to impress me, but maybe that's because they've, I don't know, found a LinkedIn profile or Facebook or something, and they assume this about this person, even though, I don't have a close relationship. I don't like to do that. I like to, yes, do my research. Of course, I've worked in sales, so you go looking for certain attributes and things to learn about a person, but I don't go into then that conversation with them just assuming that everything I found is what I assume to be true. I approach things with curiosity. I like to ask people questions, because when you ask people questions and you dig to the kind of root of why they want something or why they need something or why they're curious to learn about something, then you actually start to develop a deeper connection with each other, and you start to learn more about each other in the process, and you can truly have that space to be more authentic and vulnerable in some cases, right? And something else that we've talked about when it comes to leadership is you can have all your values, you can be opposed to this performative professionalism, but like you said before, there are going to be things that come up in our leadership journey that are unexpected, right? What's like the biggest turning point in your career, and how has that maybe shaped your perspective over time?
I think maybe years and years ago, I would have come up with something that made me sound good. But the real answer to that is that the biggest turning point in my career was when I got laid off about 5 years ago. We were coming out of COVID, and we still weren't back into the office yet. And I was actually in the middle of moving from one part of Mesa to another. And I had movers in my house. My boss scheduled a meeting with me, which I thought was kind of odd, but I didn't have a chance to really worry about it because I had other things that I was trying to do with the move. When I joined the call with him and he started talking, I knew instantly that something was off. You could just hear it in his voice. And that was him with HR on the line. That's why I had to schedule the meeting with me, saying that, they're reducing the workforce. And me, along with dozens of other people, got the same exact conversation, word for word scripted, that day. Here I was on the phone with someone who, I was very close to, and I just felt almost bad for him that he would have to be humiliated in that way to read me a script, and that he couldn't just have a human conversation, knowing me as well as he did. Months later, because he and I are still very close, I made sure to tell him to not feel bad about that. That had nothing to do with him. I had to instantly rearrange everything that I thought was about to happen in my life, which seemed to be very certain, and then all of a sudden was very uncertain. And I think it took me about 10 minutes or so after I got off the phone to like process and collect myself, and then call my wife, who was on her way to the next house to deliver a load of stuff, and explain to her what just happened, and then subsequently explain why everything was going to be okay. And I don't know that I really knew that for sure, but when that happened, I was able to stop for a second. In 2 decades of being busy and going from one thing to the next and never really having a chance to pause and reflect on what exactly am I doing with my life anyway, that was forced upon me at a time when I really needed it. Through that, first and foremost, to renew and grow in my faith. I had been too busy before to be able to invest that time with my relationship with God and what that meant for me as a man, as a husband, as a father. And I took that time to begin giving more. I think the first time I ever, started to give to my church was when I didn't have any income. I started to think, maybe banking wasn't right for me, because if I wasn't able to help people in my community and make some kind of a positive impact, what was I going to do? Live my life, retire, and be forgotten about because all I did was just try to do transactions all the time and go from one quarterly performance goal to the next until it was over. I got the opportunity to start over and still be in the banking industry, but in a much different capacity, which has been just an amazing experience of growth and development and mistakes and learning from those and building all of these relationships that never would have happened if it hadn't been for that catalyzing event of everything that you've worked for so far. Well, it wasn't your choice, but all of that's going to stop right now. Whatever happens next is up to you. I had an opportunity to take a break and reevaluate things.
Yeah, life just happens, right? Layoffs happen, and sometimes they come out of nowhere. Naturally, layoffs have a negative connotation to them. To your point, in the past, maybe you wouldn't have been as open to share your story, and now you are, but that's because you built a brand for yourself and you embrace what you've gone through and how it's impacted you. There are still people that don't want to tell people that they've been laid off, or they don't want that gap in their resume because they've heard traditionally those are looked at as a negative. And the script part, that's part of the negative connotation that comes with it. I've been the one reading the script, and I've been the one where someone has read the script to me, and it's never a comfortable situation. I love that you went back to your leader and you shared with him, do not feel bad about this. I know that was hard for you. That's the human element. Also, what I heard from your journey is when you did pause and reflect, you had an opportunity to reassess your core values, and you found that faith ended up being something that you weren't holding as true as you could, and that was an eye-opener for you. I'm glad that you've chose to actually share that turning point in your career instead of hiding it or being ashamed of it.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I can't speak for every leader out there, but I'm one, and I hire people. And I look at a lot of resumes, and when I see career break, particularly, there are a few amazing women that I know who have decided to take time to be with their children, and that's on their resume, or they're honest in the conversation about what's happened in their career. I can't tell you how much I appreciate and admire that in people, because I understand the power dynamic when someone's offering a job, someone needs a job, and the tendency is I have to say the right things to impress this person and think about it a little bit deeper. What kind of place and what kind of leader do you want to work for? Someone who would judge you for that gap in your resume, or one that appreciates you for being a real person and being, open and genuine about who you are? The culture that I build values that far more than the performative things that we've been talking about. And so maybe you won't get them all, right? But then again, maybe those aren't the places that you wanted to work for anyway. And I can tell you honestly, genuinely, when I see those kinds of things, I respond with a lot of empathy and understanding, because I was there too. The longer you are on this planet and the more you've experienced, the more you have these connection points with people of understanding. You can look at the bad things that happen to you and classify them as bad, or you can see the wealth of opportunity and growth that came out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving away from trying to prove yourself to demonstrating your skills and your values, that is all you need to do. While the person on the other end may be thinking, oh, I need to prove to David that I can do this role. But that will happen naturally. When you start asking them questions and you're learning about each other, they're going to naturally start demonstrating their qualities. Some people will take that extra step to send a thank you note, and not a very generic one, but a thoughtful one that points back to specific things that they had in their conversation with you. Even little things like that are ways that you can demonstrate the value that you bring.
Some of the best things that I have done in my career have been exactly that. A lot of it has happened because of my annual tradition of writing cards during the holidays. What I try to do with those is every single person that gets a card from me, it's not just happy holidays, David, seal it up and send it. I generally follow a pattern on these. I remember the first time that I met someone, and I remember what caused us to connect initially. And I use that as the basis for, how I explain to them how important they are to me. And I just share that. Like, I'll go around to people's offices and I'll see, like, stuck to their board or something like that, a card, and I go, man, that kind of looks familiar. And I go, what is that? And they go, that's the card you sent me. So I try to be very thoughtful and genuine, and it takes me a long time. But then again, it's an investment in relationship, because I may not have the opportunity to express that in that way, and I don't do it expecting anything in return. This might be the only thing that person gets in the mail, and they open this up and it's like they're seen. Think about that, as you're examining relationships, and how you can tell someone how important they are to you without this, without feeling like they're going to judge you negatively for sharing those kind of feelings with them. I can't express how important that has been over the years for me to be able to advance relationships into a deeper, more genuine place.
Things like that can make people's day sometimes. And then you can see how meaningful that was for them too, because it's not too often people handwrite notes anymore. Usually we're typing it up, or we're sending a message on LinkedIn, or we're texting someone. So I really appreciate when anybody writes a handwritten note.
Yeah. It's easy though to make the decision to do it. If you
Yeah.
think about what it would feel like if someone did that for you. We all have the ability and the power to do that. So what's holding you back? I don't have enough time. I'm afraid that, people will think a certain way of me or whatever. The ripple effect starts, because I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. I guess you could say it's a risk, but is it? Is anything that you consider to be a risk truly a risk? If you're being honest and genuine and empathetic towards other people, maybe it's not so much of a risk.
I didn't really think about it that way, but I would say most people tend to overthink risk. And I think that's from a place of fear and, uncertainty. Something else I know has been really important to you. What advice would you give to leaders that come from underrepresented backgrounds?
I think that is such a wonderful question, because We have a lot of opportunities to be a part of organizations where there's people that are just like us. There is such a great sense of community and the establishment and reinforcement and perpetuation of some beautiful cultural things that happen. But it can't just be that. We also have to mix a little bit. And, this is coming from a person who looks like me, white guy from the South. Then again, I'm not like everybody who comes from my hometown either. What I would encourage people from underrepresented backgrounds is to be uncomfortable in those places. I understand the challenge. That's not an easy thing to do because you are exposed to maybe more of a real risk. Comments like what you referred to earlier, that the people said you were ghetto. You're exposed to that. If you retreat into safety, where does that go? Does that truly achieve the type of community building and the type of growth that we want to see as in a society that is a melting pot of different cultures and experiences and backgrounds? I have been blessed to live all over the country and to work and be friends with people from a variety of cultures and backgrounds. What I found was people that I ultimately was the closest to shared a lot of the same understanding about life that I did, and about serving others and giving back and being compassionate and all of these things, which are not monopolized by one particular culture or another. All of the things that make us beautiful and different, we need to protect those things. Underneath all of that are a lot of ways that we're all the same. There's ways that we can connect if we're willing to make a first step. The people who are my tribe are the ones who have had a real life, not one where they're pretending and performing for other people, but ones where they, things weren't so good at certain parts of their life. We need to get past the shame and the guilt and start to connect on a real human level, not at the expense of all of the ways that make us unique and different.
Yeah, and that's something else when we think about risk being the cost of authenticity. It means putting yourself out there, especially when you are already out there to begin with, right? You could be a different color skin, you could identify genders, whatever that may be, but putting yourself out there and being uncomfortable, to your point, is what is going to help you adapt in situations. We also can't continue to live in the past and what has happened in the past, because the past is gone, and now we have to focus on the future and where do we go from here. And that's why I believe that being true to your core values is so important, because it doesn't matter who you are. If you are a human and you know your values, then you will make sure that those values bring you into the right spaces with the right people, and you don't have to put yourself in situations where you feel that shame or guilt that you mentioned earlier. I have an example, a younger individual right around like entry to mid-level of his career. He's branching off into a different industry. He wanted some advice on how to go about that, especially in such a competitive environment right now. He also comes from an underrepresented group. And when we talked about core values, he didn't know what they were at first. He had to really think about that and reflect, like, well, I haven't really thought about that. And so when we landed on a few, he had 3 that he had come up with, I said, okay, now when you go in your job search, make sure that you're looking for those values in the companies and the teams that you're looking to be a part of. And very recently, he reached out to me saying he found a job that perfectly aligned with one of his key values, which was communication. He had been in situations before where he's had really poor communication with other leaders and teams, and it didn't work out well. We have to be true to our values, know what they are, and no matter who we are, no matter what community we come from, we really lead with those values throughout everything. That is the legacy I want to leave behind. I want to leave behind a legacy that people can build brands from a foundation of that person's values, their purpose, and their experience. When you think about the legacy that you want to leave behind through your leadership, what does that look like?
Everything that I do is with the intent of handing it off to someone else at some point. the joy that I receive is through watching what other people are able to do far beyond what I was. And this is what's been going on since the beginning of time. We're all building on something. It's worthwhile to reimagine how we're doing it. And that has, a lot to do with what I was just talking about when it came to how are we working together as people with differences in culture, politics, whatever, and accomplishing greater things. With the distinction of saying, rather than doing what's in my best self-interest, how can I approach this in a way that leaves a legacy of something better for everyone who comes behind us? When we approach it that way, we start to make new connections with people that we might have thought we were at odds with, but we start to realize how we can communicate and work together. But if we're all selfishly pursuing what we want now, then no one's going to win. I've had more success in my career by giving away my treasure than by keeping it for myself. You think about legacy and what you want to leave behind for your kids. Do you want to raise kids that are thinking about their kids and their subsequent generations, or raise kids that are thinking about what they can get for themselves? From a very early age with mine, it was all about the values, How do you make decisions based off of these values? I've been amazed at how my kids have responded to that. And I hope that what I leave behind for them is not purely financial, because I don't think that's much of a legacy, really. I think the legacy is something that's intangible and worth a lot more than anything monetarily that you could ever leave behind.
Yeah, I mentioned it in the beginning. You are truly an example of someone that is building a brand that encompasses your personal and your professional life, right? You didn't just talk about, oh, I want to build this legacy so my team can move forward. You also talked about your family. And as we develop in our leadership careers, we don't lose sight of the people at home, whether it is family, friends, whoever that is for you. Those people are also a part of your journey. And sometimes we're taught to kind of leave that aside in the workplace, but your legacy is about everyone that is in your life that you are doing this for. Thank you for sharing that with us. And it's been an awesome conversation with you, David. I want to thank you again for joining as a guest speaker. What's the best way that the audience can connect with you after this?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. You can search for my name, David Scott, and you'll see this mug, and you'll know that's me. And reach out, connect with me. I like for people to be able to see what I'm putting out there, and it's a great way to connect with people and to get that message out there. So I encourage people to just reach out.
Yeah, definitely recommend following David. His posts are insightful, and especially whether you're in the banking industry or outside of it, he's a multifaceted executive. So you're going to see a lot of great content come from him on LinkedIn. And for our audience, please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel for the Multifaceted Executive. You can also download this episode and others on Spotify. And in the interest of LinkedIn, be sure to follow us as well. Until then, thanks for listening to the Multifaceted Executive Podcast, where each episode reminds us that leadership looks different from every seat at the table. Cheers.